The night it began, Lagos was drowning in rain. Thunder rolled across the sky like a wounded beast, and Adanna sat by the window of her quiet duplex, watching the storm claw against the glass. Her husband, Nonso, was on the phone in the next room, his voice hushed, tense, and urgent. She wasn't trying to listen, but the name Kamsi sliced through the thunder like lightning. Then came the words that made her blood freeze. "I told you I'll send the money tomorrow. Stop calling me at this hour." There was a pause, then a woman's voice, faint but sharp, shouting from the other end. "Your son's school fees can't wait, Nonso." The line went dead. Silence. Adanna sat still, the name echoing through her chest like a curse. She told herself it was probably business, maybe some employee's child. But her spirit, it knew. She had always known when Nonso was lying. It was the way he refused to meet her eyes when she spoke, the way his smile became too perfect, too still. That night, he came out of the room, pretending to yawn, holding his phone as if nothing happened. "Who was that?" she asked softly. He smiled, pecked her forehead, and said, "Wrong number, my love. Go to bed. You worry too much." His voice was calm, confident, too confident. Adanna looked at him for a long time, the man she'd built her world around, and something deep inside her shifted. For 10 years, she'd been his peace, his home, his biggest supporter. But that night, the peace began to rot. She didn't sleep. She lay beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, her heart trapped in a prison of questions. When he rolled over and wrapped his arm around her, she didn't move. In the faint light, she studied the wedding band on his hand, the same hand that had built her dreams and maybe destroyed them too. The next morning, Nonso left early for a meeting, and the sound of the gate closing behind him felt like a signal. She stood in the empty bedroom, the echo of last night's call still whispering through the rain-soaked air. That evening, while folding his shirts, she found something small but deadly, a crumpled photograph tucked inside one pocket. A little boy. Maybe 6, maybe 7. His smile was identical to Nonso's. The same eyes, the same dimple. For a moment, Adanna's legs failed her. She sank to the floor, clutching the photo like it could burn her skin. Her heart screamed, but no sound came out. She had seen resemblance before in strangers, but not like this. This was blood calling to blood. That night, she placed the photo in a drawer, locked it, and carried her silence like a weapon she didn't yet know how to use. In the days that followed, life went on as if nothing had changed. Adanna still cooked Nonso's meals, still laughed when he cracked jokes at the dining table, still ironed his clothes every morning. But behind her calm eyes, the storm brewed louder. She began to notice details she'd always ignored. The way he glanced at his phone before picking it up, the sudden late-night meetings, the way his scent sometimes changed, like perfume that didn't belong in their home. Her mind replayed that child's face over and over until she could no longer tell if it was real or a nightmare. Every time Nonso smiled at her, she felt that photograph staring back at her heart. The silence between them became heavier, stretching across the house like fog. On Sunday morning, while Nonso dressed for church, Adanna sat on the edge of the bed and asked casually, "Who is Kamsi?" He froze for a second, barely noticeable, but she saw it. "What?" he asked, tying his tie. "You mentioned someone named Kamsi last week." He laughed. "Oh, that? I don't even remember. Maybe one of the junior staff at work." He kissed her cheek, picked up his car keys, and left. But Adanna's spirit knew. The way his voice stumbled on maybe, the way his laughter sounded forced, truth had cracks, and she could see them all. Later that day, after church, she sat in her shop, trying to design a living room for a client, but the lines blurred on her sketchpad. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Out of habit, she reached for it, but it wasn't her phone. It was Nonso's, left on the counter. She hesitated, then curiosity broke through guilt. She unlocked it with his usual code, his birthday. The first message at the top read, "Thank you for Kamsi's books. He says he misses you. When will you visit again?" Adanna felt her vision blur. Her hands trembled as she scrolled up. There were pictures. The same boy. Same smile. Nonso in some of them. Adanna locked the phone, placed it exactly where it had been, and went to the bathroom to throw up. When she came out, her reflection in the mirror startled her, eyes swollen, lips pale, spirit cracked. She whispered, "So it's true." That night, when Nonso returned, she served his dinner with her usual grace. He talked about work, laughed about traffic, and she nodded like a ghost. But inside, she was bleeding. As he reached for her hand and said, "You're quiet today," she looked at him and smiled faintly. "Just tired," she whispered. He nodded, satisfied, never suspecting that the woman sitting before him had just buried her trust forever. That night, when he slept, she retrieved the photograph, placed it beside his phone, and stared at both until dawn. The rain began again outside, soft, endless, cleansing, but Adanna knew nothing would ever be washed away. Not the lies, not the betrayal, and not the picture of a boy who looked exactly like the man she once thought she knew. The house that once felt like a sanctuary began to feel like a stranger's dwelling. Every creak, every flicker of light, every sound of Nonso's footsteps now echoed like a warning. Adanna moved through her days with mechanical precision, making breakfast, cleaning the rooms, answering client calls, but her heart was no longer in her body. It was somewhere else, trapped between disbelief and fury. Nonso still kissed her cheek before leaving for work, still sent her casual texts that read, "Don't forget to eat, love," but his words now felt like poison wrapped in sugar. She started keeping notes, tiny, precise records of his lies. The dates he claimed to be at meetings, the receipts she found for expensive children's shoes, the extra cash withdrawn from their joint account. Each detail was a puzzle piece fitting into a larger, darker truth. Her pain became her discipline. Each discovery made her stronger, calmer, colder. She no longer prayed for the truth to stay hidden. She prayed for the strength to survive it when it exploded. Nonso, oblivious, carried himself like a man immune to consequences. When he came home late smelling faintly of baby powder and a woman's perfume, he would say, "Work stress," and she would nod, serving him dinner. But her silence was not submission, it was preparation. Every time he smiled, she saw the reflection of the boy from the photo, laughing somewhere in Aja, waiting for his father. Sometimes at night, when Nonso slept, Adanna would whisper the child's name under her breath, Kamsi, and feel tears she no longer allowed herself to shed slide quietly down her face. She had loved her husband deeply, blindly, with the kind of love that forgives too easily and sees danger too late. But now that love was changing into something dangerous, something that could not be undone. The once peaceful home had become a stage where betrayal performed every night, and she was both the audience and the director quietly rewriting the final act. It happened on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Nonso had left for a supposed business trip to Port Harcourt. Adanna, restless and heavy with suspicion, sat by his laptop trying to upload photos for a client presentation. She wasn't snooping, she told herself that. She just wanted to get her work done. But as she clicked through the folders, a notification blinked on the screen. An unread email from Ifeoma N. The subject line, Kamsi's report card. Her heart stopped. Her finger hovered over the trackpad before she clicked. The message opened, and there it was, a scanned school report card with the name Kamsi Nonso Okafor, age 8, father's signature required. At the bottom, a short note read, "He misses you. Don't forget to call him before bedtime like you promised." The tears came before she could stop them. She closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked aged, emptied. She whispered, "You were never the only one." The air in the room thickened until it felt impossible to breathe. By evening, she sat at the dining table waiting for Nonso's call, her mind echoing with questions that had no answers. When the phone finally rang, she let it buzz 3 times before picking up. His voice was calm, casual. "Hey love, I just landed." "Did you?" she asked softly. "Yes, about to check into the hotel." Her lips curved into a humorless smile. "Tell Kamsi good night for me." There was silence on the line, long, raw silence. "What did you say?" he asked finally, voice low and shaky. "I said tell him good night." She ended the call before he could speak again. Her body trembled as she placed the phone on the table. The silence afterward was deafening. She had confirmed what her heart already knew, but knowing didn't bring peace, it brought fire. That night, she opened a small notebook and began to write everything she'd learned. Names, dates, messages, amounts transferred, addresses, receipts. It wasn't just a journal anymore, it was evidence. The first chapter of her revenge had quietly begun. Adanna didn't plan it, not exactly. It just happened one afternoon when Nonso said he was meeting a client near Aja. Something in her snapped. She grabbed her car keys, drove behind his car from a distance, and followed him through the crowded roads until he turned into a gated mini-estate. Her breath caught as he parked in front of a modest house. She stayed hidden behind a palm tree, her hands shaking as she watched him step out of the car. The gate opened, and there she was, Ifeoma. Young, beautiful, and confident, wearing a floral dress that fluttered in the breeze. And then a small boy ran out from behind her, shouting, "Daddy!" Nonso bent down, lifted the child in his arms, and kissed his forehead. Adanna felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Every heartbeat was a scream. She wanted to run up to him, to tear through the lies and ask him why, but she couldn't move. She sat frozen, watching the scene unfold like a movie that had stolen her life. Nonso laughed, carrying the boy into the house as Ifeoma closed the gate gently behind them. The final sound she heard was their laughter echoing in the courtyard, a sound that broke something she could never rebuild. She drove home in silence, her vision blurred by tears she didn't remember shedding. When Nonso returned that evening, smiling as if nothing had happened, Adanna stared at him with a calmness that frightened even herself. "How was the meeting?" she asked quietly. "Stressful," he sighed, loosening his tie. "Clients can be demanding." She smiled faintly. "I'm sure they can." He didn't notice her tone. He didn't notice that her eyes no longer softened when she looked at him. He didn't notice that the woman standing before him was no longer his wife. She was something else now. That night, while he slept peacefully, Adanna sat by the window with her notebook, flipping through her notes. The truth was no longer a secret. The lie had a name, a face, and a child's laughter attached to it. And though her heart ached, her hands were steady. Her revenge wouldn't be loud or messy. It would be patient, precise, and unforgettable. Morning sunlight crept through the curtains, warm and deceptive, but the house felt like an icebox. Adanna stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection while clutching the photograph of the boy she had seen in Aja. She had barely slept, her eyes were swollen, her soul aching from too many unspoken truths. The aroma of Nonso's favorite breakfast, fried plantain and egg stew, filled the kitchen, but her hands trembled as she cooked. When he came downstairs in his neat white shirt, humming softly, she almost broke down. He smiled and kissed her cheek like nothing in the world had changed. But something had, and it was irreversible. "We need to talk," she said quietly. He froze slightly, then masked it with a grin. "About what?" he asked, pretending to sip his coffee. "About Kamsi," she said. The cup slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor. Silence fell between them like thunder. He looked at her, his face pale, lips parted but words trapped in his throat. "Adanna, I can explain," he whispered, but she raised her hand. "Don't. Just tell me how long." He sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. 8 years, he said, voice low and ashamed. Her breath caught, so long. The child had existed almost as long as their marriage. "It was a mistake," he said quickly. "I swear, I didn't mean for it to happen. I was drunk, it was before we had our second miscarriage, and I didn't even know she kept the baby until years later." Adanna laughed then, a bitter, trembling laugh that frightened even her. "A mistake you visit every week? A mistake you send school fees to? A mistake that calls you daddy?" Her voice cracked, tears burning her eyes. "How many lies did you build our marriage on, Nonso?" He tried to touch her, but she stepped back, shaking. "Adanna, please, I still love you. You're my wife. She means nothing to me. I only care about my son." The word son stabbed her deeper than any knife. He didn't even realize the weight of what he'd said. "You care about him," she whispered, her lips trembling. "And what about me? What about us?" He reached for her, tears forming, but she turned away. "Get out," she said softly. "Leave before I say something that will burn this house to ashes." He hesitated, staring at her like he didn't recognize the woman before him. For the first time in their marriage, Adanna saw fear in his eyes, not because she might scream, but because she might finally be done. When he left, she sank to the floor, her whole body trembling. The sound of the front door closing felt like the end of something sacred. She cried until her throat was raw, and when the tears ran out, she whispered, "You took everything I gave you and buried it under your lies." Then she looked up, her face wet but her voice steady. "Now, you'll watch everything you built crumble." By evening, word had reached Nonso's mother. Adanna wasn't sure how. Maybe he told her, maybe Ifeoma did. But Mama Nonso arrived at their house with that sharp expression that always made Adanna feel small. She sat in the living room, clutching her purse, lips tight. "I heard you've been shouting about things that don't concern you," she began. Adanna blinked. "Excuse me?" "You know men," the older woman continued, adjusting her wrapper. "They make mistakes. You don't destroy your marriage because of one small child." Adanna stared at her in disbelief. "One small child," she repeated slowly, her voice shaking. "He's had another family behind my back for almost a decade." Mama Nonso shrugged, unimpressed. "At least he didn't leave you. Many women would pray for a husband like Nonso." "A husband who lies? Who cheats?" Adanna asked, tears welling. "He's a good man, Mama Nanso insisted coldly. You're lucky he married you after the miscarriages. The words hit Adanna like a slap. What did you just say? She whispered. Mama Nanso sighed. You lost 2 children, Adanna. He could have left then, but he stayed. You should be grateful. Adanna stood, shaking from head to toe. You knew, she said, realization dawning like fire. You knew about that woman and that child, didn't you? The older woman's silence was all the answer she needed. Adanna covered her mouth, a broken sound escaping her. You watched me cook for him, pray for him, fight for him, while you smiled in my face knowing the truth. When Mama Nanso rose to leave, she paused at the doorway and said, Be wise, Adanna. Don't lose your husband to pride. Then she walked out, leaving the smell of her perfume and judgment hanging in the air. Adanna stood alone in the quiet house, her mind spinning. Pride? They had turned her pain into pride, her betrayal into foolishness. She sank onto the couch, staring at the wedding photo on the wall. 2 smiling faces frozen in time, now ghosts. Her mother-in-law's words echoed cruelly. You should be grateful. Grateful for deceit. Grateful for humiliation. Grateful that the man she loved had made a mockery of her loyalty. Something in her heart hardened that day. The love that once softened her became armor. She decided she wouldn't fight for that marriage anymore. She would fight for herself. Later that night, as Nanso texted, I'm sorry for the 100th time, Adanna deleted the message and whispered, You'll be sorrier when I'm done. It wasn't anger anymore, it was purpose. Days turned into weeks, and Adanna's world moved in eerie silence. She stopped confronting, stopped shouting, stopped explaining. Her calm became terrifying, even to herself. Nanso tried to mend what couldn't be repaired. He brought gifts, flowers, dinner dates, even church invitations, but nothing worked. She would sit across from him at the dining table, her eyes vacant, her voice measured, as if every word required effort. The woman who used to laugh at his jokes and stay awake waiting for him to come home was gone. In her place was someone colder, sharper, and calculating. She no longer asked where he went or why he was late, she simply noted it. Every lie, every shift in tone, every unexplained expense became part of the quiet war she was now waging. Nanso didn't understand that silence was deadlier than anger. He would prefer she screamed, cried, broke things. But Adanna had learned that silence makes guilty men tremble. At night, when he reached for her, she'd turn away. She didn't even fake affection anymore. He would sigh deeply, rub his face, and mutter, I'm trying, Ada. But she wouldn't answer. Instead, she would stare at the ceiling, her mind whispering, so was I. One afternoon, while dusting the bookshelf, she stumbled on their wedding album. She sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through pages that once made her smile. Now every image felt like mockery. 2 young lovers, hopeful, holding promises that would never survive reality. She closed the book and whispered to herself, I died somewhere in those pages. Later that evening, she watched him laugh on a phone call, his laughter full, vibrant, unbroken. She envied how easily he could still smile. Her chest tightened. She walked into the bedroom, locked the door, and screamed into a pillow until her throat hurt. But when she came out, her face was dry, her voice steady again. To the world, Adanna looked fine. To Nanso, she seemed peaceful. Only she knew that peace had become the mask she wore to hide the storm that was quietly forming beneath. The day Ifeoma came to Adanna's shop, the sky itself seemed to mock her. It was bright and cloudless, the streets noisy with life. Adanna was seated at her desk reviewing a client's order when she heard the doorbell. She looked up, and her heart froze. Ifeoma walked in wearing a tight blue dress, sunglasses perched on her head, a smug smile stretching across her face. Her perfume filled the room before her words did. Good afternoon, Mrs. Okafor, she said sweetly, her tone dipped in venom. Adanna blinked, shocked but silent. I thought I'd come and see the famous wife, Ifeoma continued, her eyes scanning the shop as if measuring the space she planned to conquer. Adanna folded her arms. What do you want? She asked, her voice low but steady. Ifeoma smirked. Just to clear the air. You see, Nanso and we have history. And Kamsi needs stability. I hope you understand. She placed her manicured hand on the counter, flashing a diamond bracelet. He was with me when you were in the hospital last year. He told me about the miscarriage. You must have been so lonely. The words hit like bullets, but Adanna didn't flinch. She looked up at the woman before her, studying her arrogance, her confidence, her complete lack of shame. You came all the way here to tell me my husband cheated with you? Adanna asked, her tone almost pitying. Ifeoma chuckled. I came here to remind you that sometimes, men belong to the woman who truly makes them happy. For the first time, Adanna smiled, a slow, quiet smile that unnerved Ifeoma. "You're right," she said softly. "Men do belong to whoever makes them happy. But happiness," she paused, leaning closer, "has a way of changing hands." Ifeoma frowned, confused by her calmness. "You'll see soon enough," Adanna added, turning back to her files. "Now leave my shop before I forget my upbringing." Ifeoma hesitated, thrown off by the composure of the woman she came to humiliate. She turned and walked out, her heels clicking loudly on the tiled floor. The moment the door closed, Adanna let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. She sat back down, staring at her reflection in the glass door. "You want war," she whispered. "Then war you'll get." From that day, the broken wife died, and the strategist was born. That weekend, Chitara arrived from Enugu, Adanna's cousin, her closest childhood friend, now a respected lawyer in Lagos. The moment she stepped into the house and saw Adanna's pale face, her eyes narrowed. "Who did this to you?" she asked, dropping her bag. Adanna smiled weakly. "Who else?" she whispered. They sat together in the kitchen for hours as Adanna poured everything out, every secret, every message, every photograph, every lie. When she was done, Chitara sat in silence, her jaw tight. "So he's been living a double life for 8 years, she said finally. Adanna nodded. "And his family knew?" Chitara shook her head slowly. "Men like him think they're untouchable. But Ada, you don't need to scream. You don't need to beg. You just need to sign." Adanna frowned. "Sign what?" Chitara smiled faintly. "You'll see." She spent the next hours going through Nonso's documents, their property papers, business registrations, and joint accounts. Her lawyer's mind worked like clockwork. "He made you co-sign the real estate company, right?" she asked. "Yes, because of tax reasons," Adanna replied. Chitara chuckled darkly. "Then that's your key." He thought he was being clever. But every trap he set can be turned against him. They stayed up late that night, drawing up silent strategies. "Revenge doesn't always need shouting," Chitara said softly, sipping tea. "Sometimes it's just a signature. He gave you legal power over everything without realizing it." Adanna listened, her heart torn between pain and disbelief. "But I still love him," she admitted quietly. "You can love someone and still teach them consequences," Chitara replied firmly. "Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget. It just means you no longer cry while winning." Those words sank deep into Adanna's heart. That night, she slept peacefully for the first time in months, not because the pain had vanished, but because the plan had begun. She finally understood that revenge didn't have to be loud, it just had to be complete. From that night onward, Adanna moved like a ghost wrapped in purpose. She stopped arguing. She stopped asking. She became invisible in her own home, quiet but watching everything. Nonso began to relax again, mistaking her silence for forgiveness. He would smile at her, kiss her cheek, and talk about future investments, never knowing that she was studying him like a case file. Every evening after he left for his supposed meetings, Adanna and Chitara would meet in her office, reviewing property documents, tracing bank transfers, and mapping his entire financial empire. Each file revealed another piece of his deceit. He had used her name to register multiple assets, thinking it would protect him from taxes or government investigations. He didn't realize that those same papers would one day become the sword that slit his empire in two. Chitara was ruthless. "This isn't just betrayal, Ada," she said one evening, flipping through files. "This is theft of your loyalty, your body, your time. And now, you're going to take back what belongs to you." Adanna's lips trembled. "But I never wanted revenge," she whispered. "I just wanted my marriage." Chitara looked at her gently. "Then let this be closure." Over the next few weeks, Adanna learned to hide her pain behind precision. She tracked every transaction, memorized every number. She created copies of deeds, passwords, and account statements. At work, she smiled as usual. At home, she listened to Nonso talk about business growth, while knowing she already held the keys to all of it. Every night when he said, "Good night, love," she whispered under her breath, "Goodbye, Nonso." It wasn't bitterness anymore, it was justice quietly taking shape. Nonso returned one evening, beaming with self-importance. "Ada," he said, waving a brown envelope, "I need your signature on something." She looked up from her sketchpad, feigning mild interest. "What is it?" "A will," he said quickly. "You know, in case anything ever happens to me. My lawyer said it's safer if we have it jointly done since most properties are under both our names." Adanna raised a brow. "Joint will?" "Yes," he smiled. "You trust me, don't you?" She almost laughed. "Of course," she murmured. He handed her the document, pages neatly typed, full of legal jargon she pretended not to understand. She nodded, took it to review, and called Chitra that night. Her cousin scanned every page, lips tightening as she read. "This is his backup plan," Chitra said grimly. "He's trying to secure everything for his son if anything happens to him." Adanna's face went blank. "Then let's rewrite his backup plan." The next day, while Nonso was away, Chitra came with a new version, carefully edited, perfectly disguised. A few sentences replaced, a few clauses adjusted. One simple line now ensured that in the event of divorce, all jointly registered assets reverted entirely to Adanna's name. Just one signature, and the trap would close. That evening, Nonso came home, and she smiled as she slid the paper toward him. "I've read it," she said softly. "Looks fine." He grinned, relieved. "Good. Let's sign it together." They both did, side by side, as if sealing another promise of love. When he left the room, she stood there holding the pen, staring at her name. For the first time since the betrayal began, she smiled, not out of happiness but quiet certainty. Justice had been set in motion, not with a scream or a curse, but with ink and patience. Weeks later, Adanna thought she'd seen it all until humiliation came knocking in broad daylight. It was Kamsi's school open day, and Nonso had gone, as usual, to support a friend's child. She didn't question it, she no longer had to. But later that afternoon, her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages. One from a client, another from an old schoolmate. "Is that your husband in that video?" Her hands shook as she opened it. There was Nonso, standing proudly beside Ifeoma, smiling as she introduced him to other parents. "This is Kamsi's father." The crowd clapped politely. Someone in the background whispered, "But isn't he married?" The video ended with Nonso holding the boy's hand, oblivious to the eyes of judgment around him. Adanna dropped her phone, her stomach churning. The video spread fast, through the neighborhood, their church WhatsApp group, even her staff group chat. By evening, whispers turned to stares. When Nonso returned home that night, she was sitting on the couch, calm as still water. "Ada, it's not what it looks like," he began. She laughed softly. "Oh, I know what it looks like. It looks exactly like what it is." He tried to speak, but her gaze silenced him. "Do you know what the difference is between truth and shame, Nonso?" she asked quietly. "One destroys your lies faster." He swallowed hard, pacing. "Please, Ada, people make mistakes. The internet blows things up. I was just there for the boy, he's innocent." She nodded. "Yes," she said softly, "he is. You're the guilty one." Then she stood up, smoothing her dress. "Don't worry. I'll protect you from shame the way you protected me." He blinked, confused. She walked past him, picked up her car keys, and whispered, "But I can't protect your legacy." That night, she didn't cry. Instead, she drove to Chitra's apartment and said quietly, "It's time." By the end of that week, the air around Nonso began to thicken with the weight of consequences. The viral video had done its quiet damage. Partners started pulling out of deals, investors suddenly postponed meetings, and clients grew hesitant to associate with a man whose scandal had become the talk of Lagos. Nonso tried to save face, walking around the house with forced confidence, barking orders on the phone, laughing louder than usual, as if the noise could drown out the truth. But Adanna saw it all. She watched him unravel one call at a time. His phone rang endlessly, his voice grew strained, his sleep shortened. "I don't understand what's happening," he muttered one night, slamming his phone on the table. "They're acting like a small mistake defines my character." Adanna looked up from her laptop, feigning sympathy. "Maybe it's not the mistake," she said quietly. "Maybe it's the lies that followed." He glared at her, confused by her tone. She smiled faintly. "Don't worry, love. Things have a way of balancing themselves." He didn't know how true that was. Behind the scenes, Chitra was executing everything they'd planned. Letters were being sent, ownership transfers were being filed, and documents quietly shifted control of key properties to Adanna's name. Within 2 weeks, every major account tied to Nonso's company had been frozen under review due to signatory inconsistencies. His best friend, Jide, withdrew from a pending land deal worth millions, claiming uncertainty. Nonso spent sleepless nights on calls, pacing their living room while Adanna slept soundly beside him, or at least pretended to. Every good morning, she whispered, now sounded like a countdown to his fall. His arrogance began to crack into desperation. He started coming home early, sitting in silence, staring into space. Adanna would serve his dinner, her movements calm and graceful. "You're too quiet these days," he murmured one night. She looked up and said softly, I'm just learning from the best." That was the moment he finally began to fear her silence. The morning the court papers arrived, Lagos was drenched in sunlight, the kind that makes everything look too calm to be real. Nonso was having breakfast, reading the newspaper, when the doorbell rang. Adanna opened it to a man in a black suit holding an envelope. "Mr. Nonso Okafor?" he asked. "Yes," Nonso replied, looking up. "You've been served." He dropped the envelope on the table and left without another word. Nonso's face drained of color as he tore it open. His eyes darted through the pages, confusion turning into panic. "Ada, what is this?" he stammered. She looked at him without flinching. "Divorce papers," she said, "along with the asset transfer authorization." He blinked, shaking his head. You can't do this. These properties are under my name." She stood up slowly, her voice calm but sharp. "No, Nonso. They're under our name. Jointly owned. And according to the will you made me sign, they revert to my sole ownership in the event of dissolution." His mouth fell open. "What?" She smiled sadly. "You remember the night you asked for my signature? That was the night I stopped being your wife and became your consequence." Nonso's body trembled as he read the fine print. The words blurred before his eyes. "You tricked me," he whispered. "No," Adanna said softly. "You taught me." He stood, his voice breaking. "You can't take everything from me, Ada. You can't." She took a step closer, her tone steady. "You already took everything from me when you made me feel small in my own marriage. I'm just collecting what's left." He collapsed into the chair, hands covering his face. "You planned this," he muttered in disbelief. "You waited all this time." "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling but sure. "Because revenge tastes best when it's signed in peace." As he sat there, broken and speechless, Adanna picked up her handbag and turned toward the door. "By the way," she said softly, "your lawyer's copy will be waiting at his office." Then she walked out, leaving him in a house that was no longer his, just a shell filled with the ghosts of everything he'd lost. Within weeks, the legal storm tightened around Nonso's neck like an unrelenting chain. His business accounts froze completely. His cars were seized under asset verification. His partners refused to return his calls, and those who once called him boss now whispered his name like a curse. Adanna had moved out quietly before the court proceedings began, leaving him alone in the empty mansion that echoed with the ghosts of his arrogance. When the auction notice arrived, he nearly collapsed. His once proud estate was now listed under court supervision for sale to settle debts and finalize asset redistribution. On the day of the auction, Nonso stood outside the gates, watching strangers tour what used to be his home. The garden Adanna once nurtured was now trampled under their footsteps. He saw the moving trucks take away the furniture they'd chosen together, piece by piece. The hum of engines drowned the last of his pride. Inside the lawyer's office, Adanna signed the final ownership papers, her expression calm but unreadable. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Chitra asked gently. Adanna nodded. "Completely." When she left the building, she didn't look back. Later that evening, she drove past the house one last time. Nonso was sitting on the porch, head in his hands, surrounded by the remains of a life he'd destroyed himself. Their eyes met briefly through the car window. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She could see the apology in his gaze, but it came too late. She parked for a moment, letting the silence sit between them like a final farewell. "You thought you could break me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I learned to rebuild from the pieces you left." Then she drove away as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, painting the city in gold. For the first time in years, she didn't feel pain, only peace and the quiet satisfaction that justice had finally found its voice. The weeks that followed felt like the long exhale after a storm. Adanna moved into a modest apartment overlooking the Lekki waterfront, a smaller space, but one that carried peace instead of pain. The quiet hum of the sea became her companion, the sound of waves reminding her that healing, like the tide, came in slow, patient motion. She no longer jumped at phone calls, no longer checked her husband's messages, no longer flinched at the memory of betrayal. Her mornings were hers again. She cooked only for herself, drank her tea by the window, and watched sunlight spill across her floorboards like hope returning home. Chitra often stopped by, bringing laughter and legal updates. "He's been trying to appeal," her cousin said one evening. "But the documents are airtight. You built your case too well." Adanna smiled faintly, not out of gloating, but quiet satisfaction. "I didn't build a case," she said softly. "I built closure." One morning, Nonso appeared at her office unannounced. The security guard hesitated, unsure whether to let him in. He stood outside in a wrinkled shirt, his face thinner, his eyes hollow. When Adanna saw him through the glass, she froze, her heart steady but heavy. She walked to the door, opened it halfway, and looked at him. "Why are you here?" she asked. "I just wanted to talk," he murmured. "To say I'm sorry." She studied him, this man who once commanded rooms, now barely able to hold his own gaze. "You said sorry the first time you lied," she replied calmly. "But you kept lying after that." His lips trembled. "I lost everything, Ada." She exhaled softly. "So did I. But I built it back. You can too." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "Don't," she whispered. "Not anymore." For a moment, the world stood still between them, the ghost of their marriage flickering like a dying flame. Then she closed the door gently and returned to her desk. Her hand shook slightly, but her heart didn't. She had forgiven him in her spirit, but she no longer owed him space in her future. That day, she understood that revenge wasn't destruction, it was release. That night, Adanna opened her old journal for the first time in months. The pages were worn, filled with ink-stained tears and trembling handwriting, each word a wound preserved in memory. She traced the lines with her fingertips, reading her pain like it belonged to someone else. "He lied again today. I saw the child. I'm breaking, but I'll rise." The last entry stopped her heart. "If I survive this, I'll never let anyone silence me again." She smiled faintly. "You survived," she whispered to her past self. The journal had been her witness through every betrayal, every night of loneliness, every small triumph of silence. Now it was no longer needed. She stood, carried it to her balcony, and lit a match. The paper curled and blackened, ashes swirling into the night sky like freed ghosts. "Goodbye," she murmured. The flames flickered against her face, illuminating a woman reborn. When she went back inside, the air smelled of smoke and closure. She sat at her desk and began drafting her next interior design project, her biggest one yet, commissioned by a foreign client who admired her taste. As she worked, she realized she was building again, not out of survival but strength. The phone buzzed. It was Chitra. "He's officially bankrupt," her cousin said. "The court finalized it today. His assets are liquidated, and Ifeoma has disappeared with the child." Adanna paused for a moment, her heart unexpectedly softening. "The boy didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly. "Maybe one day I'll help him from afar." "You always had a good heart," Chitra said gently. Adanna smiled. "Not good," she said. "Just wiser." After the call, she closed her laptop, stood before the mirror, and studied her reflection. There was no bitterness there anymore, no traces of the woman who once begged for love. Only calm, radiant dignity. "It's over," she whispered. "Finally, it's over." Months later, Adanna sat across from her lawyer in a sleek office downtown. The final document lay before her, one sheet of paper that would officially transfer all of Nanso's former business holdings to her sole control. She stared at it for a long time. "Once you sign," the lawyer said gently, "the company becomes yours entirely. You'll have full authority to manage or dissolve it." She nodded, holding the pen between her fingers. Her heart was steady, but her mind wandered through memories. Her wedding day, the nights she cried alone, the day she first saw that photo, the sound of Ifeoma's laugh, the look in Nanso's eyes when he realized he'd lost. All of it led to this moment. "Are you sure?" the lawyer asked again. Adanna inhaled deeply and smiled. "Completely." Then she lowered the pen and signed her name slowly, gracefully, like a queen sealing her own freedom. Ink flowed across the paper, calm, deliberate, final. One signature. One act of quiet power that rewrote everything. When she handed the document back, she felt no triumph, only peace. Her lawyer smiled. "Congratulations, Mrs. Okafor. You own it all." She rose from her chair, smoothing her dress. "No," she said softly. "I don't own everything. I just reclaimed what was mine." Outside, Lagos shimmered in the afternoon sun. She walked to her car, feeling lighter than she had in years. That night, she drove to the beach alone, watching waves crash against the shore. The wind tugged at her hair as she whispered into the horizon, "It's done." She wasn't celebrating vengeance, she was honoring survival. The ocean roared like applause. In that sound, she heard her heart speak. Forgiveness without forgetting, power without pride, peace without permission. Dawn came gently over Lagos, painting the skyline in gold and rose. Adanna stood in front of her new office building, a sleek, glass-fronted space bearing her name, Adanna Interiors and Concepts. The letters gleamed in the sunlight like victory reborn. Her staff arrived one by one, greeting her warmly. Inside, laughter echoed, music played softly, and the air smelled of new beginnings. She walked through the halls, touching the freshly painted walls, every color chosen by her hand, every design a reflection of her freedom. Her life was no longer defined by betrayal, it was defined by rebuilding. She opened her office window and breathed in deeply, feeling the city's pulse in her chest. As she gazed at the horizon, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read simply, "Thank you for setting me free. I'll never forget what you taught me." She smiled faintly, knowing it was from Nonso. For a moment, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not of vengeance but of release. May we both find peace, even in our ruins. Then she turned back to her desk, where blueprints awaited her attention. She picked up her pen, the same one that had rewritten her destiny, and began sketching the outline of a new design. The morning sun spilled across her face, warm and bright. Sometimes, she murmured to herself, God doesn't need thunder. He just gives a woman a pen. And with that, she smiled, the kind of smile born not from victory but from liberation. The past was gone, but her story had just begun. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and put on post notifications.